Welcome to the Spirit of Mayflower podcast with me, Rachel Carter. Welcome to episode 9, Becoming the Pilgrim Woman. And I'll be joined by my two special guests, Victoria Mason Hines, Visitor Experience Manager at Gainsborough Old Hall, and Avril Sanderson, who's part of the stitching group at the Hall. I'll also be joined by Highcliffe Music. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Victoria Mason Hines, who's the Visitor Experience Manager at Gainsborough Old Hall. And we have Avril Sanderson, whose degree is in Heritage Studies and heads up the stitching group there. Welcome to the podcast, ladies.
Hello. Hello.
So can we start with you, Victoria? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the Old Hall?
Yes, definitely. I've been at the Old Hall for almost 15 years now, so I know the place pretty well. I started out as front of house, had numerous roles, and now I manage the site, the staff, the events, and the volunteers that we have. So overarching everything that goes on there. The Old Hall itself is, in our opinion, the finest 15th century timber-framed manor house in the country, with one of the only surviving working medieval kitchens. It was built around 1460 by Lord Thomas Burgh as his home and his manor house, and was lived in by that family for 5 generations.
Right. Gosh, and would that put that in the medieval period?
Yeah, so it's classed as a late medieval manor house. It built around 1460, so for 25 years it was medieval. Then we get the Battle of Bosworth and the famous Tudor dynasty starts.
Right, okay. Fantastic. And I love visiting it, and you approach through some winding streets, and the streets are quite close, and then you turn the corner and then there it is, this fantastic hall with the wood and the plaster and the brickwork. It's just absolutely stunning. So it's well worth the visit, and particularly when you're going inside and the creaky boards and the changes of level as well in the floor. It's like you're stepping back into history.
So we always say you're walking in the footsteps of history, because although today we're talking about the links we have with the Mayflower Pilgrims, we have many different links through time. So in the medieval period, I spoke about Bosworth, and on the way to Bosworth, Richard III stayed with us at the Hall. And then later we had Henry VIII come and stay at the Hall as well for a couple of days in August.
Wow.
We also have links with a number of his wives as well. So the third Lord Thomas Burgh, handily has the same name as his grandfather. He was the Chamberlain to Anne Boleyn, so we have links to Anne Boleyn. Then when Henry visited, he came with poor old Catherine Howard, or poor young Catherine Howard, should I say, who only lasted about a year after she stayed with us. And Henry's final wife, Catherine Parr, was actually married to Lord Thomas's son for a very short while, her first husband.
Wow. Gosh, it's got some real strong links with royalty, and some very impressive visitors. When you look around, you have these characters there, don't you? 3D characters in the room sets.
Yeah, we do. The rooms themselves are, you can really imagine yourself being in that time. So we've got lots of replica furniture, which means that you can interact with the building. There are old pieces of furniture in there we prefer you not to touch, but there are things that you can really interact and make you feel like you're living in that time, along with different costumes from different periods as well.
I think that's a perfect time to bring in Avril into the discussion. So could you give us a little bit about yourself, Avril, and then your role within the stitching group?
Yeah, I was a nurse for 30 years before I decided I'd had enough of nursing, and went and did the degree, which has led me down a completely different path. I haven't worked as such, but volunteer 2 days a week at the Old Hall, either dressing up in costume to frighten the visitors, or to or to make some of the costumes. In fact, the embroidery on the Henry VIII costume that's in the solar, I did the embroidery on the sleeves for that, for Pauline Loven when it was commissioned for an exhibition. So it's all sort of led from there. It's all come by accident, but I'm really missing it at the moment, I must admit.
Oh,
Yeah.
so was the Victoria, was the stitching group always a feature of the hall?
No, we started this, I was trying to cast my mind back, trying to think when we first did the stitching group, and it was about in 2010. We got some funding to set up a volunteer project, and we decided to do this. Avril mentioned Pauline Loven, who we'd worked with before on a number of projects, one of them being costumes of Henry VIII, and also a film which Avril volunteered and is part of that film. And then she joined us as one of our first volunteers in the new costume volunteer project.
Right. So, Avril, what kind of things do you get to make for the hall?
Well, like I said, apart from the doing the costume for Henry, I helped with that, and then we've moved on from that to make either costumes for ourselves or the staff to wear. Costume I wear is a nun's habit, when I'm in on Sunday. Most of what we've made in general has been a Tudor, kirtles and coats and things like that to keep people warm. It's very cold, and then I think I am the only remaining volunteer from that original group, and it's led us on to as a group to refurbish the bed upstairs in the solar, to make costumes for other people who volunteer, to making costumes for the models, along with the rest of the volunteers, that hopefully will all be sorted out and back in as soon as we open, but they're ready to go.
Oh, fantastic. So the hall has really got quite a big part of the Mayflower origin story, hasn't it? And isn't it thought that separatists met there to preach in secret?
Yeah, so Gainsborough as a town is really important in the story of the separatist movement, and they're the people that went on to be known as the Mayflower Pilgrims. The preacher that we had that came to Gainsborough was called John Smith. Now, John Smith was a preacher in Lincoln to start with, but he got kicked out of Lincoln because of his strange doctrines. So he came to preach in Gainsborough. Now, it's believed that the people that own the hall at the time, we've moved on to the second family now, and we've got the Hickmans. Now, William Hickman was a wealthy merchant from London, and he brought the hall from the fifth Lord Borough, who was impoverished at the time. So he brought the hall from him and moved up from London with his mother Rose. They're both believed to have separatist leanings and probably allowed that first congregation of separatists to worship secretly within the old hall. And we do know that there are tunnels that link the church to the hall. So these people may have gone into church because it was illegal not to go to your local church. They had to be seen to be going into that church. But they could have gone through these tunnels, come up in the old hall, and then been allowed the freedom to worship in the way they wanted to.
Wow, that's amazing to think that there's these hidden tunnels near the hall, and but then just trying to think of the mindset of these people trying to scurry through these tunnels to be able to preach in the way that they want to preach. That it's amazing story, isn't it? And I suppose costume is a great way to bring that story to life. And I think I was having a meeting with Dr. Anna Scott in the old hall, and I think that's the first time I met you, Victoria, isn't it? And we sat and had a coffee, and I'd got with me a book that the Bakewell Old House Museum had loaned to me because I was interested in looking at the fashions of that time that relates to the Mayflower, but with a bit more of a leaning to working class attire rather than the fancy clothes that you see portrayed in churches, in stone monuments and in paintings. So I really wanted to get a flavour for the working class outfits. And I brought along this book, The Tudor Tailor, and you said, well, we use this book in our stitching group, and you introduced me to the great stitching group. But it was looking at those historical sources, and you shared with me a few paintings, didn't you? With, was it Pliny the Elder?
The Bruegel paintings, probably.
Yes.
They are amazing paintings that really, they're so active and there's so much to look at, and they have a wonderful, not only do they display the costumes, but also all the artifacts that the everyday late medieval Tudor person would have worn and would have used.
Would you say that the sort of clothes for the working classes have changed much across that medieval Tudor period, or do you think they've stayed pretty much the same as a practical piece of clothing?
As fashions change today, then fashions did change from medieval to Tudor period. One of the main changes from the later medieval into the Tudor is they kind of separated out the top part of we'll call it a dress, shall we, a kirtle, the dress the ladies would wear, into a more fitted and tighter kind of bodice, and then a skirt. Medieval were a bit more fitted continuously to the body and very tight sleeves, and then we change into this Tudor period where it looks like two different items sewn together to form the kirtle. Right.
So Avril, would you give us a little bit more details about what a kirtle is? So if somebody has never seen a kirtle, could you describe, what is a kirtle?
Within the Tudor period, it switched to being called a kirtle, and it's often worn with separate sleeves. You can put sleeves on it when you're not working, but when you're working, you take your sleeves off, and you've got just the linen shift underneath, which enables you then to carry out your daily tasks. And it's really hard sometimes because a lot of paintings only show the upper part of a body, even for the higher status people in society. You only often see the top part. So I think the nice pictures in the Tudor Tailor actually shows that the drying fields, I think it's a Dutch painting, where they're drying linen in the sun to bleach it. And then you see the women with the skirts tucked up and the sleeves rolled up and everything. But the kirtle was done up, either you could have it done up in the front, done up and down the side, or done up at the back with laces. That we make the laces as well. But if you imagine, if you're on your own, trying to do one up at the back is almost impossible. I think you perhaps would have found that because we made yours to do up at the back. But if you've got it done up at the front, you can do it yourself. And it means, again, perhaps that means lower status because you're not got a servant to help you do it or anything like that. They are very tight fitting at the top and cut quite low and square, and then very gathered skirts, which we attach to the kirtle, and if you look at statuary, funeral statuary particularly, you notice that the undershift, the shift that goes underneath the kirtle, is also very full if you're wealthy enough. Again, it's working class clothing doesn't often survive, either in paintings or in reality.
Right. So when I came along to the hall and was explaining that I was looking at creating an outfit, because one of my original ideas for the sculpture was basically a dress flowing in the landscape, and Victoria said, well, our stitching group could make you an historically accurate costume, and I thought, well, that's fantastic. But then they said, well, we need someone to model it on. It needs a body, and I think, I can't remember who said it, but they just said, well, why not you, Rachel? And that was that was quite a surprise, because I thought I'd never imagined myself being in my own artwork, but it's right, you need something to build it on. So so I said, okay, why not? And that's how this whole the Pilgrim Woman kind of began, from that very first meeting. So one of the things that I wanted to do is create a fullness of skirt, so I could sculpt it and give the sculpture, well, some life, so it wasn't just static. So bring in some movement of the fabric, but I knew that I wanted to decorate it as well, particularly at the front. So as Avril's already hinted to, we moved the fastening of the kirtle to the back, which wouldn't have represented working classes, but I took a small artistic license on that, didn't I?
Yeah, no problem.
So for over the series of a few months, I returned to the old hall every couple of weeks for dress fittings, and one of the amazing things as well is the vast majority of it was hand stitched. So Avril, how do you begin making the shift and the kirtle? What comes first?
Oh, we had a look at you had a drawing, and apart from thinking, yeah, we can do that, we actually had to decide how. And Diane particularly managed to, we came up with this slotted undergarment where you could fit wires into it to give the illusion of movement. But that then meant that the shift under the kirtle had to be huge. To accommodate the extra wiring and things, and again more flow in the sleeves. We don't generally have a pattern for things. We use, because we know how it needs to look, so we use, I suppose it's called draping really, where we make a pattern on you, which we did with calico, so we get the right size and use that as a pattern, and then we develop it around that. It's a very organic process, I suppose. Particularly cutting the shift out was, and we did do the long seams in on a machine, but the linen frays very badly, so we have to turn in the seams on the inside and stitch them by hand, because we sort of pride ourselves on anything that might show is done by hand. So the top stitching around the top of the kirtle, the armholes have to all be done by hand, and the eyelet holes all have to be done by hand as well. It's quite a laborious process. Thankfully, yes. I don't mind doing eyelets, so it's not a problem. Everybody's going, that's massive, that's much, much too big. It's not, it's fine. But Diane's undergarment is the base to all of it, and she spent weeks channeling and working out ideas of how we might do it. So she spent weeks putting channels in the back of the undergarment, on the bodice side of it, and then also around the hem, so that you could put wires at various points.
Yes.
It was interesting to do something completely different. So from that point of view, we got our brains working anyway.
Yeah, because when I explained to you all that I wanted to be able to sculpt the dress, so we had to then, as you said, have 3 layers. So an underskirt that could be sculpted and filled with wire, and then the shift, which is, it's like a ginormous nightshirt, isn't it? It goes all the way from neck all the way down to the floor with a full sleeve, and that was in linen. And then the kirtle over the top of that was in a traditional wool fabric. So and that fabric for the kirtle was just so lovely. And I think the measurements for the skirt, I think you ended up using over 4 meters of fabric to fit around the circumference of the skirts, didn't you?
Yeah, at least that, I think, because it was we had to make it in 2 parts so we could get a bit longer at the back for the movement. And thankfully you're the same height as me, so we knew where we could put the hem and everything. So we did it. We sort of did it like that. But it's it was it occupied our brains quite well for a few months.
I think that's a great place to pause for a moment, and we're going to be joined now by Highcliffe Music, and we'll return to Victoria and Avril very shortly. The Pilgrim's Journey and the Mary Brewster Letter, written and performed by Ella Pritchard of Highcliffe Music. The pilgrims are within sight of land at last, and Mary is overjoyed after the horrendous journey across the Atlantic.
The Mayflower, 9th of November 1620, 65 days at sea. My dearest Patience, what news! More than 2 months have passed since we started this journey, although many more than that since we left Leyden and were last able to be in your dear company. Our prayers are answered. The Lord has delivered us within sight of the new world. To think that when I last wrote to you nearly a month ago, we hoped to arrive within a week. We have been becalmed and bestormed in equal measure, and I was starting to believe we would be roaming the oceans until the end of our days. You cannot imagine how my heart leapt when we heard "Land ahoy!" My stomach flipped, and for once it was not seasickness. The children were so excited, and indeed all of the passengers were rejoicing. Your father led us in a service of thanksgiving with prayers and hymn singing. I do believe our ways have had a good effect on some of the sailors. They were joining with us in the hymns. Some of them have got truly excellent singing voices, although they sing in a manner quite unlike any I've heard before. The words to their sea shanties are often too bawdy for me, and are certainly unsuited to the ears of my boys, but the songs, although rough and loud, have such a compelling rhythm and roll that I fear I will miss them when we finally leave the Mayflower behind. The sailors call this place Cape Cod, and from a distance it looks green and fair. However, it is not the destination we were hoping for. We tried to make headway down the coast towards the mouth of the Hudson River, but the seas were too rough, and, being mindful of the temporary repair to the main beam, Captain Jones ordered us to return to Cape Cod, where we could more readily find shelter. We are now at anchor some way from the land, and there is at last the knowledge that we have survived the journey. We are all keen to start to build a new life and a new church here, free from the fear of persecution. But these November days are short, and the nights are long and dark. I fear we may have to see out the worst of the winter on the Mayflower before we can properly begin. There is some need to make haste to send men ashore, though, as food rations are becoming depleted. Captain Jones is determined to retain a decent portion for his crew's return journey, as there may be little sustenance to be found on land at this time of year. The passage across the Atlantic has been a trial to us non-sailors. There were many times I feared we would not survive it. As I know I have said before, I shall never take a sea voyage for pleasure, and hope that you and Jonathan and Fear will soon be with us, because I could not face to cross the ocean back to you, even if it were safe to do so. There is more sad news. The Lord has taken one of our number back to himself. Young William Button took ill and died even before we knew that land was in sight. He was servant to physician Samuel Fuller, and little more than a youth. So sad that he did not live to see the new world, to celebrate our safe arrival, or to begin his new life. We pray that he is now at peace with the Lord, and that he will be granted eternal rest. Well, I really must go. The children are so excited to be within sight of land that there is no hope of keeping them still, and I need some time to pray. There is so much to thank God for, not least for bringing us safely to our destination. We all need to take some rest, as there will soon be much work to be done. This is the day. With very much love to all, Mother. P.S. Trust in the Lord.
Welcome back, and we're just discussing the mammoth task of making the Pilgrim Woman's outfit from hand, and it really was a group effort, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's sort of thanks to everybody although myself and Diane did a lot of the work. Everybody had some part in it, really, in either the discussions of it or how we might achieve it. So everybody sort of contributed to making the costume.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to sort of big them up a bit as well, I think.
What's the range of ages? You know, what's your eldest member in the group?
89. That's my mother-in-law.
Gosh.
And I think I'm probably the youngest at 60.
Okay.
Well, you've got Diane's daughter.
Oh, of course, Anna comes, doesn't she?
Yeah.
She's a teacher. She's probably about 27, coming up for 30.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. And she comes in the holidays. So, yeah, and she definitely had good maths working skills when we were trying to cut stuff out and work out an arc and things like that. So just finding big enough tables to put things on to cut them out was quite interesting.
Yeah.
So she was instrumental she did a lot of the sewing on the shift, particularly, and making sure we didn't cock it up, to be honest.
But it was quite an experience as an artist to actually become my own work, because, you know, when I'm creating sculptures, obviously, you know, you put, you know, your heart and soul into whatever you're making, but then to actually be in the actual artwork and being stitched up, and as each layer goes on, your posture changes. And that was something I noticed about the kirtle, the way that it, as those laces at the back tightened and your bust is pushed upwards, and it's really
have to lift
tight.
It gets quite intimate lifting your bust.
Yes. So it really does, you know, as much as you're effectively dressing up as somebody from a different time period, you actually do feel like you've become them, because it does change your posture and your body shape and the way that your body's been shifted and moved about and fastened into these, and it does feel very different. And then particularly the headdress. So you created for me a headband that would keep away all my hair, and then a linen bonnet that went over the top. So was that the only piece of linen within the costume? Was the shift cotton?
No, the shift was linen. So we only used sort of fabrics that were available at the time. Although cotton's starting to come, the shift was linen, and we made the hat not of the same linen as the shift, because we've got a finer linen that we use for hats and things like that. It was a brighter white.
Yeah.
For a little while anyway. And then that was made. Jan made that hat. She's made several, 100, and because I think originally you wanted your hair to flow, didn't you?
Yes.
But to keep that with the method you were going to use for the sculpture, it needed to be covered, and also at that period more women had their heads covered. It was, everybody did. It was how you did it. So, although
was that the fashion of the day then, to have your hair completely covered up?
Yes, yeah. And then you've got, you see, when you see films and things where they're walking around without any hats on, that's wrong. But it keeps your hair clean as well. It keeps it out of the way when you're working and things like that. And it's the back of the bonnet is called the bag, and hair coils up in there nicely, keeps it out of the way.
Yeah.
Which was important. Yeah.
Right. The other thing I noticed as well about the outfit was that lacy collar that always seems to be on anything related to a pilgrim. But for the classes, they wouldn't have had that lacy collar, would they?
No, because I mean, lace is all handmade at that time, and it's a sign of status as to whether you can afford to have it. I suppose you could have had a plain white linen collar in some of them, but again, white bleached linen is again, high status, because it's difficult to get it done.
Yeah.
You're also looking at the lady that we were creating is of that first congregation. So you're looking around 1607.
Yeah.
So you have got, you know, a 15-year gap almost between those people that you see and think of as the Mayflower Pilgrims to the lady of ours that was leaving Gainsborough. And we
Yeah.
have to point out at this point when we're talking about costumes, because it's a bugbear of mine, that they would not have buckles on their hats.
Yes.
Got to make that point, get that in there.
No buckles. I suppose it's a bit like the everybody imagines a Viking with horns, and historically I don't think they had horns on their hat, did they? But it's
Yeah, that's my second bugbear, as Gainsborough was as well once capital of the Viking world, so we have good Viking links as well. Yes, definitely no horns on Viking helmets.
Yeah, and I think, well, Danelaw stretched all the way down to Nottingham City, didn't it? At one point, we was all under Dane rule, and I actually have the Scandinavian DNA in my ancestry, which was quite interesting. That so when I look back at my ancestry, that some of my ancestors were mixing with the Viking settlers, and the rest is history. So So the two things within history then that are always done wrong is the Vikings didn't wear horns on their hats and pilgrims didn't wear buckles. So
but everybody wore a hat.
Yes.
and more than likely two hats. So you've got like with your dress, you've got your linen and then your wool. You'd have a linen coif, your linen hat, and then you'd have a wool hat on the top of that. So double everything up.
Yeah, and do you think, the large shift, that huge shirt that you had underneath your kirtle, would that have been worn at all times of the day and night, or would they have had separate wear for sleeping in?
You possibly would have worn your shift, but you only wore them one day, and then you took that off, and that was cleaned. Your outer dress, obviously made of wool, couldn't be. But the thing that touches your skin, so that's why you have a linen coif and then your wool hat on the top, and you have a linen shift and a wool kirtle, because that underneath one is taken off every day, and a clean one is put on.
Right, okay. So it is then, I suppose, medieval Tudor underwear, but it's ginormous.
I mean, yours obviously was a lot larger than a normal person would have been, so we could get everything underneath. But yeah, ladies, unfortunately you've got no bras, you've got no pants, but you would have had a clean shift on every day.
Yeah, gosh, it's the biggest piece of underwear I've ever worn in my life. Wow. And I think right towards the end, as the Pilgrim Woman outfit was coming together, we'd had an image from the foundry, because we was going to be using photogrammetry to capture the Pilgrim Woman, and we'll go into that in more detail in a future podcast episode. But we'd sent a picture of me in the outfit at the old hall, I think holding a tin of buttons or something in my hand, because I knew I was going to hold something in my hand. And we sent the picture to the foundry, and they did a mock-up and dressed up one of their employees, wrapped some blankets around their waist, and it was such a funny image. But then one of the things they said to us is the photogrammetry is not going to be able to see white, and a lot of the Pilgrim Woman outfit was white. So at the last minute we had to change the colour, didn't we?
Yeah. Yes, you did.
So the only thing I could find at that late stage was a blue machine dye, a denim blue. So at the last minute, the shift and the bonnet and the headdress had to go in the washing machine with a denim blue dye, and I had this ginormous shirt on my washing line drying away. Because a lot of people have since asked, is that shirt an historical colour? But no, we just had to change it for the computer, for the digital age.
Yeah, it was a bit because Diana starched the bonnet, the coif really, really carefully as well, so it was nicely shaped and everything. But never mind, these things happen.
Oh well, I want to thank you both so much, both for all of your help in this project. This project definitely would have been a very different outcome had you not been involved. So for that, I am truly thankful for all of your help and assistance along the way. And also thank you for being my guest on the podcast.
It's our pleasure.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. Spirit of Mayflower is part of a series celebrating my Spirit of Mayflower project. You can get involved in lots of ways. You can take a look at some of the movies and pictures I took on my journey by heading to the Rachel Carter Sculpture Facebook page. You can also head to my website at www.rachelcarter.co.uk, and there you'll be able to view some of the sculptures I make, treat yourself to a limited edition Pilgrim Woman sculpture, or take a look at some of the online tutorials. And do join me for the next episode, where we'll be discussing the commissioned sculptures and the locations within the Pilgrim Roots district.